To work with the Photo-Etch and resin parts, there's a number of tools you're going to need in order to do the job right. This is my preferred tool set, but every tool shown is not absolutely required. A good sharp pencil, you're going to be doing lots of marking on resin and plastic. As for knives, a regular X-Acto with lots of sharp number 11 blades. You're going to be doing a lot of cutting. Now, I also like to use this other one for scraping and smoothing. Razor saws with a selection of blades. I use the smaller one for smaller pieces, tight places. This bigger one is great if you have a lot of material to remove. Now, the Dremel is an excellent tool to have. If you don't have one, it is something to consider. I use the Dremel 3000 and I purchased a supplemental handle for more control. I also bought the threaded chuck for speed and changing bits. You'll definitely want a cutting disc, put it in, tighten it, release the lock, good to go. This is going to help you to remove large pieces, because sometimes you have to remove material and sanding by hand can be slow. For that, I use the barrel sander. Now, you're going to want a dust mask when using this because the resin dust is highly toxic and it gets everywhere. Regular sandpaper, very, very handy. Files or microfiles. Why? Because even when you cut the Photo-Etch parts off the plate, you can't always get close enough to remove the attachment point, and it leaves a little burr, so you just file that off. Crazy glue. This is how you're going to attach the Photo-Etch and the resin to the model. And I get this in 4-packs from the dollar store, and I get these little precision pipettes off Amazon. Again, you don't need all these tools, but they're very, very helpful. Razor saws are a must. X-Acto knife with sharp blades are a must. Sandpaper is a must. Green Strawberry provides a comprehensive set of instructions, but I'm going to deviate from the order based on my build-up procedures. As far as parts go, the first thing up is the listing of Photo-Etch items for the hull, and then the individual resin pieces. And these red marks show you what material has to be removed. Some are easy, some are a bit more difficult, but we'll get into that in further steps. Even though I'll be deviating from the printed instructions, everything is provided with a really nice blow-up diagram like the warp engines here. And then when you flip the page, you have a nice overview of the main hull and the impulse engines and pylon wings, whatever you want to call them. And there's a lot of pieces that go on the main hull, so we're going to be breaking that down into several independent sections based on resin and Photo-Etch. Once again, on the pylons, the red signifies areas that need to be removed, and we'll be discussing that further, but this is a nice exploded diagram so you know what to expect before you get into it. And there's a bit more on the exterior of the pylons, plus the rear portion of the hull, including side covers and phaser strips. The nacelle is made up of more than just the grills and the Bussard collectors. There's the phaser strips, which this comes with 2 for the upper portion, but if you go early Deep Space Nine, you could leave them off completely. Here I am looking at different ways of removing it. First, you can start with the X-Acto blade and kind of work it off. I prefer the razor saw just for speed, but you gotta be careful because it's very easy to damage the underlying plastic. Once that strip is removed, whatever method you use, you're going to want to use the sandpaper to get rid of any raised edges because you want that perfectly smooth for when you apply the new phaser emitter. Here's a good example of what I was saying about being careful with the razor saw. I've got a little notch there I do have to take care of. Otherwise, this is a pretty good removal. This is a bit of a repeat, but I want to come back to using the X-Acto knife to remove the any raised pieces. It's a bit more time consuming, but with a little bit of experience with the knife, you can get a much more precise removal. Of course, you got to remove this heavy stuff first. And once that material's gone, you're going to do the same as before and give it a nice good sand to get it smoothed down because you want that nice smooth area to apply the new phaser bank. As you can see, the phaser bank comes on a resin block with the phaser strips raised slightly. I like to use the razor saw, either the large one or the small one, depending on the application, and I'm going to cut this large so that I have the ability to control the overall height when this is removed from the block. Once you've cut all the way through the block and see the raised area, once again I like to leave a lot so I can sand it and have control over the height, because I like to leave a little bit of a base on the phaser strip rather than the phaser strip directly against the hull. Not much, maybe a millimeter, but it just provides a base. Once that's done, you're ready. Apply some crazy glue to the base for attaching it to the nacelle, just like that. The warp engines on the Runabout are a bit complex because of this two-piece clamshell design from AMT. For ease of installation, the grills have these raised pegs, which help get them in the right position without you having to mess around too much. Here's an example. We're going to flip this over. We got the grill. Just place that in there, and you can see you got nice alignment with the recessed edge and the edge of the kit supplied part, though there is a minor modification that needs to be done right here, and that is cutting the kit supplied nacelle part back about 2 millimeters. It's a pretty easy modification to do, and it gives you a better fit. You can use a number 11 X-Acto knife on this, but I prefer the razor saw just for a little bit more precision. Once you've cut away the piece, then you can still use the X-Acto knife to get in there and clean up the edge, or you use sandpaper or a file. Builder's choice. And once again, razor saw down one way, then back the other. Piece comes out, and clean up the edge with your X-Acto knife, or as I said, file, sandpaper, whatever. And we're going to recheck the fit, and that is much, much better. Once you've made your modifications, you can do another test fit, and here's an example of how the pegs are used to hold the grills in the correct position. This is really going to help you when it comes to gluing that together. For the purposes of this instructional, I'm going to keep it simple and only apply glue to the pegs. However, I would recommend applying crazy glue all the way around the edge of the warp grill where it mates with the nacelle. It'll help the nacelle maintain its shape and give you a much stronger assembly. Once assembled, there's a little trench right down the middle long enough to add a strip of LED tape. I apologize here, I lost the footage of removing the base resin from the Bussard collectors, but it's the same as removing the phaser strips. Just use your saw. Once the Bussard collectors are prepped, just apply some crazy glue to the mating surfaces, and then you are ready to assemble these nacelles. And that's what it looks like assembled. Not too many steps. Just take your time though, because the kit supplied parts are a little bit difficult to work with, and there's some fit issues. Now, let's take a look at the pylon/impulse engine assembly. There's multiple steps to this. There's photo-etch, there's resin pieces, there's clear resin pieces, and material on the kit supplied parts that needs to be removed. Here's a look at the vent on the forward edge of the outer pylon and the phaser strip. Both these pieces have kit supplied material to be removed in order to install them. And here's a look at the underside of the pylon assembly that has multiple resin pieces to go in. This, as an example, is the impulse vent transparent piece, and due to its molding, there is some material that needs to be removed. I opted to use the Dremel because I have a fair amount of experience with it. Wouldn't recommend it for first-timers. Maybe use a razor saw and definitely sandpaper. If you use sandpaper alone, it's the slowest way to do it, but the safest way to do it. And this has the added benefit of roughing up the surface so you get a more diffused light. Because this is a multi-step process, here's a look at the underside of the pylon assembly with the resin pieces in place and the kit supplied part cut away. So you can see how everything fits together. There's the impulse exhaust vent, and of course the forward frame was shown earlier. And this shows the whole assembly put together. In almost every case, the first step is removing the resin part from its molding base, tree, sprue, whatever you want to call it. I like the razor saw in most cases. Now, that will need a little bit of cleanup just to smooth it out. And this inside part is very, very thin resin. You can generally remove it with the blade and then do some additional sanding afterwards, or even use a file to get the correct results. And that is the piece with the resin removed from the middle. Gonna do a little bit of touch up there, and then pop in the clear piece, well, orange piece, pardon me, so you can see how that looks. And flip it around to the back. That still has the base installed, but gives you an idea of where everything goes together, and it goes together very well. Now, let's look at opening up the kit supplied part to allow for the lighting parts to go in. My preference is to place the resin piece in its final position and then use a pencil to get a general outline of where things go. Now, this is just a starting point because the kit supplied part needs to be opened up even more to make allowances for the fitting of the orange transparent piece. And that's what I'm doing here, marking a much bigger opening while still leaving edges for the resin piece to be able to adhere to with crazy glue. And for this, a micro drill bit is always good. Once again, I use the Dremel because I'm a bit about speed, and I have a fair amount of use on this under my belt already. New builders may want to consider using a pin vise. It's much slower, but much more precise until you get comfortable with the process of cutting and removing. So what I'm doing here is using a hobby knife to cut through the material left between the holes in order to remove the piece and open it up, and then I'm going to use the knife to kind of smooth out that area a little bit. And we'll test fit the piece and see how we did. That is a pretty good fit. We've got a good opening and the translucent piece fits right in. Up next is the impulse exhaust transparent pieces, and I'm going to use the razor saw to remove the molding block from them. As you can probably tell by this point, working with aftermarket resin parts is a lot of cutting and shaping, but it is absolutely worth it for the end result. Here I'm cheating a little bit and using the Dremel to smooth the edge instead of using the sandpaper because I do like shortcuts. And here I'm using the Dremel to do the entire job, which once again, this is for people with a steady hand who have experience with this tool. So, as I keep saying, I would recommend using the razor saw until you're comfortable using something that has, I don't want to say a lot of power, but it has a lot of torque, because if it grabs, it's going to want to wrench the whole thing out of your hand and wreck your parts. And here's a close-up look at the finished part after using the Dremel to cut it. And we're going to do another molding block removal, this time on the back of the impulse exhaust plate. And as before, I'm using the Dremel just because, as I said, I like shortcuts, but I have experience with this tool and a number of hand tools. So until you're more adept at this, always use razor saw or file or sandpaper. But once you have this tool mastered, it's going to be one of the best things you ever purchased. So we've sanded off all the block, and now we're going to open up the impulse exhaust vent. Just pop that out with the knife, and we're going to give that a sand just to smooth it so we get a good flush fit with the kit supplied part, and that is the underside of the pylon assembly. And that looks pretty good there. As with the intake piece, we're going to do the same with the exhaust piece. We're going to place it, and I'm going to use, in this case, a long neck marker to mark where the impulse exhaust is. And now I know roughly where I'm going to do cutting. Same as before, use the pencil. We're going to make a bigger opening to allow for installing the piece, just in case we need a little bit of wiggle room. And same thing, Dremel, drill lots of little holes all the way around the edge just to get full coverage, and then use the hobby knife to cut the excess away, and then pop that assembly out, get in there, smooth it, and potentially use a file in there, but odds are you won't need to because this isn't visible. Another test fit, lots of opening, lots of freedom of movement for installing parts. Pop the transparent piece in there, and look at that. Nice red glow is going to come out of there once you throw some lights in there. The phaser strip is going to be old hat because we've already done this on the nacelles. And we're also going to open up this whole area for the new vent to go in. Just mark everything out with your pencil just so you have some guidelines so you know where you're going to cut. I'm using the hobby knife to just strip away the raised phaser bank, and then I'm going to file/sand this area smooth in preparation for the new part install. I know I keep talking about how much I use the Dremel and how much I like it, but for precision cuts like this, definitely razor saw, because I want to be able to stop on a dime if I need to, should it look like I'm going to cut too far. So there's one cut, and we're going to cut the other side. We're not going to cut the middle yet, though. The reason why I didn't cut that with the razor saw so I can use the hobby knife to score this a little bit, because here's the thing about styrene. Once you score it a bit, you can generally snap the piece off. Once you've scored it a few times, then you can use, should be pliers. I'm using these cutters for some reason, back and forth a little bit. That'll pop right out, and that area will need some sanding because the kit supplied part has a beveled edge. So we're going to start with the hobby knife to bring that down as much as possible so that you don't have to spend as much time with the file or sandpaper. Once you've removed sufficient material, then you can get in there with your file or sandpaper. In this case, file's a bit better because you have a bit more control over the area. And just take some away, and then do a test fit, and just keep repeating this process until you're happy with the fit that you have. Then crazy glue, as always for resin parts. Gonna pop that in there, just all the way around the edge. Once again, I have these tips I got from Amazon, so you can get a nice thin bead. Pop that in, let it set, which should be pretty quick, and add some extra if you feel that you need to. I probably didn't, but I like redundancy. And it's okay to use a kicker to set off the crazy glue faster. This is actually from a kit called Miter Bond I buy from Home Depot. And there you go, you've got the piece in. Of course, you do not want to forget the phaser strip, so same as before, get some crazy glue on the back of that. I add extra just so it gives me a little bit of working time for getting it positioned properly. And once it's there, a little bit of pressure will help it cure up. And if you need to, you could use the kicker as well. And there we go, exterior resin pieces installed. Now that we've tackled all the resin pieces, let's start looking at the photo etch. Use your hobby knife to remove the piece from the sprue. I've applied crazy glue to the kit supplied piece. Drop it on, get it placed. This is an easy one because it goes right over an existing piece that doesn't need any filing or sanding. Now these little guys, they're small, so it's a bit hard to work with. Get as close as you can with the knife so you don't have to do as much or potentially any filing to get rid of the nub where it was attached to the plate. Crazy glue on the piece. We're going to drop that in there. Same as before, crazy glue on the piece. Use a steady hand so you can get that lined up as best as possible. In she goes. And there you have it. Pylon photo etch. That's a nice little detail to add to this kit. After doing the warp engines and pylons, the rest of this resin is going to be super easy. We're going to get into this piece here, which I believe is a transporter pad, and we're going to remove some of the molding block with the razor saw. Once again, this is more for precision and cutting, but due to the way it's shaped, we got to do a bit more work. Now you can remove that with the razor saw, but I've opted in this case to use the Dremel. Once again, do what you're comfortable with. One of the things I like about the Dremel the most with this cutting disc is it can be used essentially as a sanding pad to smooth things out very quickly. And yeah, we got that nice and smoothed out. Now we're going to apply crazy glue to the kit supplied piece versus the resin piece. No particular reason, just easier to work with, I feel. Pop that piece in there, make sure it is positioned properly, give it a little squeeze, and do the same on the other side after you've removed the molding block, of course. Crazy glue, pop the piece in, make sure it's positioned properly. Give it a little squeeze. I don't know if that actually does anything, it just makes me feel better about getting a good tight fit. Up next is the phaser strips, or weapon sails as I call them. I really like this part because it's way better than the kit supplied part. And it's going to be the same procedure as before. We're going to remove the molding block from the piece, razor saw in this case, just to get it nice and precise. And get that removed. There may be some excess material left, so we're going to use a combination of the knife just to get any raised stuff. But you want to be careful with this because resin does not react the same way as styrene. So for beginners, I would recommend using sandpaper just to save yourself some hassle until such time as you're more adept with the pieces. This time I opted to apply the glue to the resin piece versus the kit piece for no particular reason. Pop that on there. Make sure you got good, nice, tight fit, and that crazy glue will cure up right quickly. And just like that, good, strong bond. Same on the other side, crazy glue on the piece, place it on the hull. It has these little alignment pegs, which I didn't show in the first one. And there you go, beautiful pieces installed. This small resin detail is challenging but not impossible because it's just like the phaser strips. As you can see here, it's just really tiny, but it is on the same molding block as the phaser strips, so cut off with your razor saw, sand the base, crazy glue on the part, or kit supplied part, whichever you prefer. Install it, make sure positioning is good, and you are good to go. Speaking of phaser strips, there are two more on the aft of the Runabout, and same procedures before. Remove them from the block, sand them smooth, crazy glue on them, position them, put them in place, and boom, there you go. Phaser strips on the hull. That's a nice little detail that AMT missed. For the last step, we're going to tackle the exterior photo etch, and we're going to go with this little guy on the side of the upper hull. And you do need to remove some existing material. I'm going to use the hobby knife to start that. Once the bulk of the raised detail is gone with the knife, then use the sandpaper to sand that smooth, being careful not to impact the rest of the area around it. Then, with your sharp hobby blade, you're going to cut the pieces away from the plate, getting as close as you can to the piece. That came out pretty well, but we're going to give it a bit of a file just in case, just to make sure it's as smooth as possible. Then apply some crazy glue to the back of the part. Place the piece on the hull, getting it positioned properly, and maybe use some kicker if you need it, but not always. Go with what works for you. This upper transport emitter is a two-piece element, but we also have to remove kit supplied detail. So what I've done here is I've used a combination of razor saw, knife, file, an assortment of tools to get the best cut. And this is where that earlier blade I was showing you comes in handy for a bit more wide coverage. All the details removed, give that a sand so you can get the whole area nice and smooth and ready for the part. As I indicated, it is a two-piece part. You got the main plate and then the transporter emitter. So you're going to remove both of these from the plate. Sharp hobby knife, cut the connection points on both pieces. If you've cut closely with your hobby knife, as I've said before, you shouldn't need the file, but it doesn't hurt to do it anyway, and I maybe should have said that sooner. So don't be afraid to go back over all the PE parts just to make sure that it's nice and smooth and ready for assembly application. Apply your crazy glue to the base, and then place the upper part. Should be reasonably easy to get that nice and straight given how it's designed. Crazy glue on the hull where the piece is going to go. Go ahead and drop it in and work on getting your placement right. And there you go. Upper transport emitter. After the last two photo etch parts, this is a nice easy one because all you're going to do is remove it from the tree, give it a file if it needs it, apply some crazy glue, and then place the piece on the hull, just like that. There are 4 small plates that go on the upper hull on either side of the dilithium chamber, and for those you do have to remove this raised detail. For that, I opted to use the larger, wider blade, just to get as much coverage as possible, as precise as possible in this small area, and then doing the final removal with the smaller number 11 hobby blade. And as always, give it a sand to make sure it's perfectly smooth. Remove the pieces from the plate. If they need a file, as I keep saying, do that again, just to be sure. Apply glue. In this case, I applied to the piece versus the kit supplied part. Drop it on. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there you go. More warp core detail. There are 2 more plates that go on either side of the upper rear RCS thrusters, but these are a little bit easier because you don't have to do anything but glue them in place. Just like that. This part, 1, 2, 3, and 4, may be a bit more challenging because it's a multi-step process. You have 2 layers of photo etch, so 8 pieces comprising 4 pieces. So, as always, sharp knife, remove them from the tree, file them if you need to, crazy glue, put the pieces together, and I just started lining them up so I had them, left to right in the correct order. If you're worried about placement, Green Strawberry has taken a step to make this a bit easier for you, and you can temporarily glue this little alignment piece in place, and then start manually adding your raised photo etch pieces. Once those have set, you can then just use your knife to pop off the alignment shim. The final step is photo etch on either side of the rear hull. On the studio model, this looks like it's a connection cover. So you have one on each side. As with every other photo etch part, remove it from the tree, file it if you need to, bend the edges, glue them on, and you have them installed on the hull. And as you can see under the rear observation windows, there is another resin piece. Nothing to do with that. It comes ready to go. Just glue it on. And then you have a complete runabout.